Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's video on Sunjata, an Empire of Old Mali. In this particular video, I'm going to discuss the cultural and historical background for the Epic of Sunjata. I'm going to start with a quick background on Africa, given that it's such an important part of the modern and pre-modern world, and yet it is so often misunderstood. So here are some basic facts. Africa is a continent that encompasses over 50 countries. There are over 1,000 different ethnic groups in Africa, which obviously means that there are a multitude of different languages spoken on the continent, including Zulu, Mandinka, Swahili, Yoruba, Hausa, and many others. There are also many diverse religious traditions in Africa, spanning from indigenous African religions, which we'll talk about in just a bit, what we normally call African traditional religions, to the Abrahamic religions such as Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. On this slide, I want to show some maps of Mali, the specific region in West Africa where the story of Sunjata comes from. On the left, we can see the modern-day map of Africa, where Sunjata's Empire of Mali corresponds to several modern-day countries such as Niger, Mauritania, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Senegal, and Liberia. On the left-hand side, we can see a map showing the 13th century Empire of Mali in purple, along with the trade routes that shaped its culture, such as the trans-Saharan trade routes that integrated West Africa in the global economy of the Silk Road by interconnecting it with North Africa, namely modern-day Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, and also East Africa through trade routes leading towards Ethiopia, Somalia, and the Red Sea. In the Epic of Sunjata, we can see the imprint of these trade routes influencing West African culture through characters who are travelers, scholars, warriors, or merchants who arrive in Mali from North Africa, assimilate, and settle in the kingdom during Magan Konfara's reign. These characters include Manjan Barete, Abdul Karimi, and Abdul Kasimu. One of the core values that the epic shows is transculturation. Transculturation is a term coined by the Cuban anthropologist Fernando Ortiz in the 1940s. For Ortiz, cultural assimilation was not a one-way process, but rather a two-way practice that involved cultural exchanges and borrowings between immigrants and the host society that they're assimilating into. This process gives rise to new cultural and social practices and reshapes the culture as a whole. We see this in the beginning half of the Epic of Sunjata, where you have the mixings between African traditional religions and Islam through these characters' immigration. The cultural imprint of African traditional religions in the epic can be seen in ideas such as connection and communion with ancestral spirits who are believed to guide their descendants, cyclical ideas of time, and connection between the natural and human worlds. In fact, the magical power of Dalilu arises from the indigenous African concepts, such as the innate connection between natural, spiritual, and human worlds. The cultural imprint of Islam in the epic can be seen in the ideas of monotheism, the embracing of cultural diversity and plurality, and the idea of social contracts and pacts that influences Sunjata's formation of the Mandan Charter in the early 13th century. Given that the Epic of Sunjata begins as an oral poem, it's important to talk about the griots, or as they are known in Mandinka culture, the jelly. The griot is not an African word. It is rather a French word that is a corruption of the Fulani word for griot, gaula, or the Wolof word galwa. Griots are the musicians and oral storytellers of the Mali Empire who transmitted epics like the Epic of Sunjata. The Empire of Mali corresponds to the Mande or Mandinka people, and the Mandinka word for griot is jelly. As Dr. Nubia Kai has explained, the jelly or griot is more than a storyteller. He or she is also a historian, musician, ambassador, diplomat, mediator of local and international disputes, advisor to kings, and the officiator of ritual and ceremonies like marriage ceremonies, naming ceremonies, harvest festivals, and national holidays. This context is important because while the epic was first written down in the 17th century, the written version still preserves aspects of oral storytelling. So, for instance, in one scene in the epic, Sunjata uses his magic power or dalilu to move the canoe across the river. The written version preserves the onomatopoeia of the oral version, recreating the sound purr. There are other aspects of the oral format that get transmitted into the written version as well. I've discussed the Epic of Sunjata as an example of transculturation, a fusion between cultures of West Africa and North Africa, between indigenous African culture and Islam. So, to understand how this influences the world of Sunjata, I want to first explain some key aspects of African traditional religions. African traditional religions, or ATR as it's sometimes called in short, is an umbrella term that groups together the diverse belief ways, practices, and traditions of African indigenous religions on the African continent. Examples of this include the belief systems of Vodun, which migrated to the Americas and became voodoo, the Yoruba gods and goddesses, and Ashanti spirits like the famous trickster Anansi, the spider. Like epics, the stories, mythologies, rituals, and ceremonies of African traditional religions were transmitted from one generation to another through oral culture. While African traditional religions encompass many diverse religions and practices, there are some common features. These include a strong connection with nature and the forces of nature, animism, strong connection with spirits of the ancestors, and the practice of communing with spirits, natural, cosmic, or ancestral, through song, dance, and ceremony. African traditional religions, or ATR, sees the world of the ancestors and spirits and the gods as intertwined and co-present with the human world. According to Jacob Olupona, professor of indigenous African religions at Harvard University, quote, the defining line between deities and ancestors is often contested, but overall, ancestors are believed to occupy a higher level of existence than living human beings, and are believed to be able to bestow either blessings or illness upon their living descendants. Ancestors can offer advice and bestow good fortune and honor to their living descendants, but they can also make demands, such as they're insisting that their shrines be properly maintained. A belief in ancestors also testifies to the inclusive nature of traditional African spirituality by positing that deceased progenitors still play a role in the lives of their living descendants. Now let's discuss Islam in West Africa. Islam has been a major presence in the African continent since the 7th century CE, and indeed today, Muslims constitute around 40% of the African population. Islam's first contact with Africa came when Muhammad, the founder of Islam, was experiencing extreme persecution in Mecca and sent some of his followers to the ancient Christian kingdom of Abyssinia, corresponding to modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, where they found refuge. Islam spread in Africa through the caravan routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa with the Mediterranean coast of North Africa. It was through the economic interconnectedness of the global Silk Road that led to the mixing of populations and the integration of Islam in West African and sub-Saharan culture. Merchant scholars traveling from North Africa were instrumental in spreading Islam to West Africa. And we see this through the character of the Moroccan scholar Manjan Barete, who travels to Mali, settles there, and weds his sister Sansun Barete to the king Matan Konfara, Sunjata's father. All three of the great empires of West Africa, namely the Ghana Empire, Mali Empire, and Songhai Empire, were Islamicate, and the rulers blended Islamic practices with local religious traditions and beliefs to create hybrid and culturally inclusive societies. Contributions that Islam made to West African culture include introducing cultures of scholarship, writing, and book culture in West Africa, and amplifying African Christian trends of integrating African lifeways with Abrahamic spiritual traditions. Within this context of transculturation, there are a couple of key terms that I want to explain to help you understand the world building of the Epic of Sunjata. The most important term is probably Dalilu. This is a term that is rooted in African traditional religions, but it also gets assimilated to African Islamic traditions. So basically, Dalilu is magic power, usually translated in Western languages as occult or magical power. However, there's a bit more to it than that, and I'm going to explain. Dalilu refers to goal-oriented powers that can be trained and cultivated through a variety of methods, including gaining knowledge, practicing rituals, practicing initiation, the use of sacred speech, or chanting, and practice. So based on the African indigenous concept of the interconnection of human beings, nature, and the world of spirits and ancestors, the idea is that most people are born with Dalilu or the potential for Dalilu. But based on the individual human being's unique constitution, talents, background, this Dalilu can manifest or can be trained in specific ways. So, for instance, in the beginning of this story, when Maran Konfara is trying to find how to sire the prophesied child who will rule Mali after him, he consults sand diviners in his court. To foretell the future, a sand diviner would need to use his or her Dalilu, or innate power, through the ritual of sand divining to foretell the future. Or another example, with exceptionally powerful characters like the Buffalo Woman and Sorolon, it's possible to transform your body into a spirit or wraith, as the Buffalo Woman literally transforms into a magical buffalo spirit. If you were a doctor, and yet another example, you can use your Dalilu to heal the sick. Later in the story, we encounter warriors like the adult Sunjata and Fakoli, who are able to use their Dalilu to telekinetically transport themselves across rivers, create a force field to press people in the hall against the walls, or to cause their horse to leap across a ravine, as Sunjata does in the final showdown with Sumaworo. So, in effect, Dalilu is innate magical potentia, or, quote, the thing in a human being resulting from the interconnection of human spirit and natural worlds that a person can direct towards knowledge or art or warfare or music or medicine or any kind of practice, or on a general level, getting something to work, end quote. So, in sum, it's a sophisticated magical system based upon indigenous African beliefs. I also want to explain the term taboo, which we meet in the scene of Sunjata violating Sumaworo's taboo when Sorolon and her family are trying to find refuge in Soso after being exiled from Mali by Sunjata's stepbrother. Taboo also comes from the African traditional religious world, and it is a concept assimilated into African traditions of Islam and Christianity as well. It entered into popular European languages after the publication of Sigmund Freud's 1913 book, Totem and Taboo. A taboo refers to a sacred and thus forbidden object or behavior that becomes a social commandment for the tribe or community. For instance, certain objects that have deep personal and symbolic significance to the king or chief's person are taboo for other members of the tribe or foreigners to touch. The idea is that the king's body is sacred, and hence certain intimate or symbolic objects are tied to his status and aura. We can see Sunjata violate this by sitting in Sumaworo's sacred hammock. So in essence, he violates the taboo of sitting in Sumaworo's hammock. Certain other behaviors and practices regarding kings and chiefs are also taboo. For instance, it is taboo for an Akan chief to be struck by anyone lest ancestors bring misfortune on the attacker. Also, it is taboo for a chief or king to walk barefoot. Once again, the king is considered to be the father of the tribe, and his body and person and aura are sacred. The function of such taboos is to enjoin respect for the power system in African social and political structures. The term fetish is also part of African traditional religions that gets incorporated into African Islam. Like taboo, this word is familiar to us, entering into popular European languages after European travelers and traders began exploring the western coast of Africa in the 16th and 17th centuries. A fetish is an object believed to have supernatural power by becoming a medium for invisible spiritual intermediaries. In effect, it's a human-made object that gives one power over places or other people or things. So, for instance, the three sacred objects that Maran Konfara gave to Sorolon for safekeeping to bestow upon his children when they are of age are fetishes. The sorcery mask, and sorcery horse are magical objects infused with the maker's Dalilu. As Sorolon explains to our children, Konfara's Dalilu is infused in these three objects because he made them. So, in essence, fetishes act as amplifiers to the wielder's own Dalilu, which is why Kunfara wanted all three objects to go to one child, his successor Sunjata, so that he can be endowed with the power he needs to protect the Mande people and defeat Mande's enemies. The idea of the fetish can also be seen in Caribbean Vodun culture, where sorcery dolls can be used to amplify one's magical power or cause harm to somebody else. Magic is itself neither good or bad. It depends on the end and purpose to which the wielder of the Dalilu directs his or her power. So here's one example of fetishes that are available in museums today. Today, these are art collectors' items that are bought and sold for millions of dollars in auctions such as Sotheby's. So this particular image is a male figurine made by the Congo peoples from Congo and Zaire. It's made from substances like wood, glass, iron, and other materials. And it's currently housed in the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C. One kind of fetish is a sorcery mask, which we encounter as one of the objects in Maran Konfar's legacy to his children, and also in the sorcery mask used by the Buffalo Woman to develop Sorolon's powers. So these are also today important art collectors' items that are bought and sold for millions of dollars by museums and private collectors. In African traditional religions, masks are believed to have supernatural powers that can protect the community. Masks can be used to protect, to heal, or to harness supernatural spirits for the benefit of the community. Conversely, masks can also be used to defeat, sicken, or harm a threatening aggressor who harms the well-being of the community. The frightening aspects of the mask are used to remind violators inside and outside the community what can happen to the human form if they violate the boundaries of appropriate social conduct. Let's conclude by discussing the character of Sunjata himself. As an epic hero, Sunjata shares some of the virtues that we have discussed with previous heroes whose stories we have read, like Odysseus, Rama, and Sinbad. He is brave, resolute, resilient, devoted to his family and community. However, there are also some unique aspects about him that we should highlight. He begins his life disabled due to the plots of Sokolon's co-wives, who are jealous of her and don't want her to birth the promised successor to Kunfara. He is born unable to walk, and in response to the mockery that Sokolon endures from the co-wives, he overcomes his disability through determination and sheer force of will. He undergoes some key rites of passage in Joseph Campbell's format of the hero's journey. He is forced into exile by his half-brother Dankaran Tuman and stepmother Sansun Berete. He, his mother, and his siblings, Jamori, Mandanbori, and Kolonkan, are forced to travel from kingdom to kingdom to find refuge, including Soso, the kingdom of the person who will become his greatest enemy. He is brought back to his kingdom by Manjan Barete and other tribal elders due to the inhuman cruelty and wars of Sumaworo, the king of Soso. Sunjata eventually wins by building coalitions and uniting the tribes against Sumaworo. Other characteristics of Sunjata that we can see from the story are that he has an exceptionally strong will. He overcomes his disability by bending and breaking wooden staffs and iron bars until he straightens out his legs and is able to walk. He grows up to become a great warrior and hunter. For example, when he's in exile with his mother and siblings in Nima, he fights in the army of the king of Nima and also and at the same time, while he's employed in the king of Nima's army, he continues to think long term and strategically. He not only wins battles for the king of Nima, he takes some of the captives from the battles and converts them into his own men, creating a personal army that will follow him to fight Sumaworo and win back Mande. So even in exile, he continues to think and plan like a king. He's so good at fighting that even when the delegation from Mande arrives, the king of Nima is not willing to let him return to Mande and tries to force his hand and make him stay by denying Soholon burial. Sunjata is also a powerful musician and has great charisma. We see this in the scene before his exile when Dongkran Tuman passes by Sunjata's house with the group of young men while Sunjata is playing his instruments. So beautiful is his playing that one of the men stays behind to hear him play, even though he's part of the retinue of his half brother and rival. This unfortunately leads to the young man's murder, as we see. Sunjata has exceptionally strong Dalilu. He's able to use his magical powers to hunt, play instruments, teleport himself across riverbanks, make canoes run across the river without their needing to be rowed, and to cause the sorcery horse to jump across ravines. This is no surprise given that he is the son of Soholon and the nephew of the Buffalo Woman, two women renowned for their power and Dalilu. Sujata also has a powerful sense of confidence. So here I want to direct your attention to the scene from the story when he violates the taboo of Samomoro when he, his mother, and siblings are in Soso seeking refuge. So the question is, why would he do that when Sumaworo warned him not to sit in the hammock? The reason that he violates the king's taboo is because even in exile, Sunjata is thinking of himself and conducting himself as a king, that is, as an equal and not as a subordinate or lackey to Sumaworo. Even when he has lost his kingdom, his men, his wealth, his position, his mindset and goal are still that of a king, and he conducts himself as such. So that is one of the core lessons that we get from the story to basically conduct yourself as the great person, great man, great woman, great person that you are, that is your potential, even in conditions of extreme hardship and deprivation. Lastly, another really important value that the story teaches us is the importance of building coalitions, teams, and alliances. So that is how Sanjata essentially wins. He wins by building coalitions and alliances. Something unique about Sunjata is as an epic hero in the end is that we don't actually see him killing Sumaworo personally, at least in the version that we're reading. It's Fakoli who does that. We get the snuff taking competition and the horse jumping competition where Sunjata's sorcery horse jumps across the ravine, and Sumaworo's cannot, signifying the difference in their Dalilu. However, we don't get the action-packed climax or showdown that we come to expect in epic stories like the Avengers, where you get that showdown between the Avengers and Thanos. The reason is that Sunjata essentially wins by alliance and team building. By the end of the story, he doesn't need to personally show off his strength in a one-to-one combat with Sumaworo. In African collectivist political and social traditions, by building the stronger alliance and uniting the tribes against the sorcerer king, as Sumaworo is known, Sunjata has already won. The Mandan Charter, one of the earliest declarations of universal human political rights and human civilization, is an outgrowth of the spirit and wisdom. I hope this was useful, and see you next time.